ये देखो फुल स्क्रीन कैसे होगी स्लाइड?
एक मिनट, व्यू फुल स्क्रीन, ये कर्सर कहाँ है? स्लाइड शो कहाँ है? व्यू स्लाइड शो, स्लाइड मास्टर देखिएगा। फ्रॉम बिगनिंग, फ्रॉम बिगनिंग।
और ये अपने आप मूव करेगा?
नहीं, ये क्या होगा?
सिर्फ दो कर सकते हैं।
हाँ, अप एंड
ये वाला और यहाँ पे वो चिल्लम चिल्ली मत करियो।
Good morning, everyone. This is Seema Varma from KLAY NCR. Today, on a cold winter morning, I'm going to be talking about, from this side of Gurgaon, to all of you about a very, very important and significant aspect of early years learning, which is language and literacy in early years. So before I start on talking in detail about language and literacy in early years, let us look at, from the brain perspective. Brain, as we all know, is a very, very complex object of a human anatomy. And for the longest time, it had been very, very difficult to understand understand the complex functions of brain. But over the years, with new imaging tools and the research and the ongoing research that is going on, more and more insights are coming into how the brain functions and how we can customize, even for educators. It is a huge, huge shift in the paradigm to really understand how we can, optimize learning and how we can understand what is happening in early years brain development so that we can optimize learning for children and in the process world build on language and literacy. So the second slide that I'm sharing, like brain building happens from birth. So if you look at the size of a brain of an infant, it is the size of our palm, basically a baby's palm. But however, let us not get misguided by the size of the brain, but actually all the neurons, the billions of neurons of that small brain is already developed. And these brain development happens at birth and continues throughout adulthood. An analogy, just to make it simple, is something that, as I have understood, I would like to share with all of you, is that brain development is like building a house. It is a step-by-step process that begins with laying the foundation, framing rooms and installing the electrical wiring. That is what we do when we build a house, right? So the most intense development occurs during the first 3 years of a child's life. And this is absolutely critical. I think for caregivers, for parents, for everybody to understand that what is really happening from 0 to 3 years and how can we contribute significantly to the development, to the holistic development of a child. It is important that we understand the criticality of 0 to 3 years. So the most intense development occurs. So laying a solid foundation really builds a strong brain structure or brain architecture, as we may call. Like there is a house architecture. So similarly, the brain architecture is also there. A weak foundation definitely will again lead to a faulty structure. So what is really happening? So we know that the brain is full of these billions of neurons. So while these neurons are lying like that, the the connections need to be made. So they exist, since they exist throughout the nervous system. All the basic functions, as we all know, as well as complex executive functions, are also controlled by the brain. So brain cells, as soon as an infant or a child comes into this world, brain cells are making these connections all the time. Connections are made when the child has experiences. So for an infant, if I may talk, the experiences are very different because it is a survival instinct in a child, and everything is very need based for an infant. So when a child thinks, when a child significantly grows up, moves from infant to toddler, when a child thinks, brain cells are used. And these connections keep getting stronger the more the child uses. So these are the neurons, and these are the specialized brain cells that have to be connected or wired in the correct manner with the right experiences. And that is how these neurons and these billion neurons are basically taking control of the basic biological functions such as hearing, vision, to more complex and thinking functions. So this is what is happening at the brain level. But what is happening in the physical world of the child? So let's look at this slide, which talks about the journey of a cell to a human. So we know the fetus, as we all know, moving on to newborn from 0 to 3 months, then infant 3 months till about a year, and then toddlers we have 1 to 3 years, which in our context of KLAY preschool, we have junior toddlers and senior toddlers, and then there are the preschoolers, which are from 3 years to 6 years. While we have understood the brain and we have understood the child in its physical form, there are two critical elements that go into the development of a child into a very successful and happy human being. And these two forces at work are the nature and the nurture. So, what do we understand really by nature and the nurture? So again, I have repeated the slide over here, but the two arrows are actually pointing out the significant correlation between the nature and the nurture. So both count. So these are the two forces which are very, very important. So both nature and nurture count. So brain development is a complex, actually a very complex interplay between the genes and the environment. So again, to give you an analogy, if genes were like the seed, the potential which is waiting to manifest itself, the child's early environment and experiences are like the soil, the sunlight, the water tilling, and the care that affect how the plant will grow. Right? So if we have to nurture a seed, we have to provide the right kind of environment for it to manifest itself into its potential. So genes determine when specific brain circuits are ready to be. So genes are actually the element that determine the sequence and timing of the development also. And the child's environment are those that shape these circuits to be formed and functions to develop. So the brain is essentially a very, very adaptive environment. If the experiences are right, if the experiences are nurturing, if the experiences are positive, contributing, then, it builds circuits. It will build a strong foundation. So like the wiring of using the house building model, as a child is stimulated by the environment and the experiences that we provide to the child. And then the child naturally will respond to them. So a consistently nurturing early environment helps the brain to form the right connection for a very, very healthy development. And similarly, a negative environment would create some kind of malfunctioning connections that will hamper the development of a child. So it is very, very important to understand this for all of us parents and caregivers. However, when we talk about this, another thing that we have to remember, the brain is not just about the correlation between the nature and the nurture and the connections that are forming. So all the areas of development are very, very important. So it is not just about one aspect of brain developing well, the language or literacy or the emotional. So every area is very, very important because it is not just about building intellectual abilities. Emotional, social, physical, thinking abilities are they are intertwined like a multi-fibered weaving. So if you look at a very rich tapestry, which has different colors and hues and threads, so the success of that tapestry is the fine tuning and everything that goes into the weaving of that tapestry. So each of these strands in a tapestry is very, very important and significant. That contributes to the richness of that product that comes out. So similarly, each strand in the brain and the connections and each experiences that happen, they are the essential part of the whole. So emotional well-being and social skills, they form the basis of emerging thinking abilities. So learning to talk, for example, if I were to just give you an example, would involve it basically involves the physical abilities like healthy hearing and an ability to differentiate sounds. So, what is the most significant part is that the child should be able to hear properly. It also requires the ability to link meaning to specific words, to concentrate, to interact socially, and the desire to communicate. So these are some of the things that really, really happen at the brain level. So one of the other things that I am going to be talking about today is coming back to clay. How do we nurture the language and literacy, and how do we foster language and literacy at clay? So as you all know, for most of you who are parents at clay and caregivers at clay, and for the other parents who are not yet our clay parents, clay family, so I would just like to share that we have these programs which start as early as the infant, and then there is a toddler program which again has two segments, which is the junior toddler and senior toddler, and then we have the pre-K, and then we have the K1 and K2, and then the child seamlessly transitions into grade 1. So now the next few slides is what I'm going to talk about will essentially focus on language and literacy building at clay, and how do we do that. So we know that language stimulation starts as early as infant, but and there are three key things that comprise the language and literacy as a whole. So these three important buckets are speaking and listening, viewing and reading, and representing and writing. So if you look at it, you would wonder that a child doesn't know how to speak, but the child knows how to listen. The infant's vision for the first few weeks is not just focused. The child cannot read, and representing and writing for an infant at an infant stage is very, very difficult. So progressively, what are the steps that go towards a child successfully being able to view, read, represent, and write and speak? So those are some of the key elements that we will talk about today. So when we say language and literacy, so what do we mean by literate? So language and literacy development, what does it mean? So essentially, from a theory perspective, if I were to share with you, so it basically means, to develop vocabulary, to use language to engage in conversations, to develop verbal and non-verbal communication skills, display emergent literacy skills, basically preparing children to read and write, to be able to identify and differentiate sounds, phonological awareness, print awareness, concepts, recognition of letters, letter sounds, correspondence, building words and sentences, and display the use of pre-writing skills, like it can start with scribbling, marking, drawing, etc., for a variety of purposes. So coming back to how does a child learn a language? Have you ever seen an infant? The infant doesn't start speaking from birth, right? So how do they learn to speak? They learn to speak by listening. So listening is the first step for language development. As infants start listening and responding to the sounds around them, and eventually the listening forms the basis for their babbling. And they start with simple first words of communication like baba or dada or oho, or which are used to convey a whole sentence. So these words are typically called hollow phrases, where whole phrases are full of meaning in their world because they are self-contained. So up, you be up, for example, may mean pick me up now. I need to be held. So language acquisition continues rapidly throughout early childhood, where children keep listening and comprehending to improve their vocabulary. So talking, speaking to a child is very, very important in child's language development journey. And listening leads to speaking. Similarly, a child does not start reading. It is viewing which leads to reading and representing in the form of scribbles and strokes that lead to writing. So it is a continuous circle that is linked, that one element supports the other, and eventually all the areas of language development happen throughout the life. And that is how. So I hope I'm clear to you. So moving on, so here are the language and communication developmental milestones from an age perspective. So there are three categories here. So age 3, age 4, and age 5. So age 3 would be, following instructions with 2 or 3 steps, can name most familiar things, understand words like in, on, under, say first name, age, sex, names a friend, generally, very focused on me and my environment and my immediate environment, my family, my friends, uh, talks well enough to strangers to understand, says words like I, me, we, and carries on conversation using 2 to 3 sentences. Of course, age 4 significantly is more advanced in terms of their communication skills and their expressive language. So is able to tell stories. The stories could be very short. Sings a song or says a poem from memory, such as Itsy Bitsy Spider or Wheels on the Bus. Knows some basic rules of grammar, such as correctly using he, she, can say first and last name, ask questions, and provides explanations. And age 5 speaks very clearly, is able to express themselves with confidence, with proper context, and can also comprehend. Tells a simple story using full sentences, uses tenses, future tense, especially, for example, grandma will be there, says name and address, knows and may misapply rules of grammar, like saying would instead of went, begins using private speech, like you might hear the child's inner monologue. So, and the child is able to define common items by use. That is, the fork is a thing that you eat with. So, these are some of the language and communication development milestones. Now, let's really look at it how at KLAY we foster and develop and nurture these children appropriately for them to be able to meet these developmental milestones. So the next few slides are very progressive, which talks about the toddlers, talks about pre-K, talks about the K1 and K2. But essentially, I would really want to focus on the K1 and K2 and then go back to how whatever in K1 children are doing, how does the language and literacy program that we have at KLAY is really supporting children to reach to this level. So if I look at the K2 program, K2 program, like I shared, that language and literacy concurrently influence one another. They develop concurrently and they influence one another. So what children learn from listening and talking in the earlier years, they contribute to their ability to read and write, and vice versa. So, if you look at the listening skills and the speaking skills, there are two categories over here. So, which really talks about the phonological awareness, the ability to identify and make oral rhymes, identify and work with syllables and spoken words, and the ability to hear, identify, and manipulate the individual sound. This is an important indicator of their potential success in their ability to learn to decode the print. And this is a very, very important skill and a very confidence building skill and a school from the school readiness perspective, formal school readiness perspective. So if I look at the K2 program, so all letter sounds from A to Z, children are able to, read and they are able to write. Then digraphs is something, the pair of letters that make one sound. So SH, chair. So hard digraph and the soft digraph also. So soft digraph, when I talks about this theme, thank you. And the hard digraph would talk about the brother, the mother, this, that, these. So these are the hard digraph sounds. So apart from that digraph, children are also well versed and they are introduced and they are familiar with blends. And just to give you an idea, a blend is a pair of group of letters that work together using each of their individual sounds. So phonetic sounds, basically. So it is blur, clur, br, cr. So these are the sounds. Along with this, children are very, very confidently using long vowel sounds and short vowel sounds. Of course, that is. So what is happening when children are listening to all these sounds at one level? So when these sounds are being more and more, children are listening to these sounds, and the listening skill starts much earlier. So please refer to my earlier brain building that as early as infancy, children start listening to sounds. And when we come to the pre-K level, so there are different games that we play, there are different activities that we do. So alliteration is one form where these sounds are reinforced over and over again. So clapping for the odd one out. So, or alliteration, like if I were to give you an example, decorating delicious donuts. So listening to the same sound over and over again, the first letter of the sound. So that is again reinforcing in children. And once this listening skill is properly in place, the second part on the same page talks about the speaking skills. So what is happening when children are listening? So they are building on vocabulary. They are using so high frequency words, basically using of frequently used words. I would say high frequency words that they are hearing over and over again. Speaking about self, using these words to describe themselves, describe their friends, speaking about their favorite things, speaking in front of an audience, the show and tell that we have. Children are so confidently talking about an object, something about which they know, something which is very dear to them, something which is part of their environment, and narrating their own story. So building on to their, lending their imagination to create their own story. So we know that children have very, very fertile imagination. And all this is happening here in our environment where children come in for schooling for 3 hours through narrating a story from the book and through the learning centers, through the routine that happens from morning to evening, from free play to concept time to circle time to visiting the learning centers to outdoor play to the field trips that we have through show and tell, the culmination that happens for them at the end of the term every day. Through walking through the corridors, doing an outdoor visit, the nature walk that happens, the rhymes, and the transition song that happens. So they are all working on their listening skills. So the more conversation that we have with children, more important, productive, relevant conversation that we have with children will go a long way in building on to their ability to support their speaking skills. So this is something that we are very, very focused, and this is how children have journals also where they are really writing and representing, and they are also doing their own. That is a medium for them to self-express themselves. Again, how do we support? So once the listening happens, once the speaking happens, then comes the reading skill. So how do we support reading skills? So reading happens by reading. It starts with the CBC word, the consonant, vowel, consonant. Words by blending letter sounds. So the CBC word, just to give you an example, would be as simple as cat, zip, rug, pen. Reading words that begin with introduce digraph. Right? So digraph would be anything, any word that introduce blends. So that is also children learn. So blends are again, like I shared, blur, clr, cl, fl, gl, glr. So these are all the words that children are frequently, exposed to. And the sight words. So sight words are something that, these are high frequency. So sight words is a very, very large bucket. But if I were to say that I and they are actually the high frequency words, and sight words do not follow any phonetical rule. So it could be the words table, chair, which are essential for children to know as part of their everyday life. So those are sight words. And I and the, to give you an example, are the high frequency words which fall under the sight. So that is how children, are building on to reading. And more these sight words, they are, being introduced to them, reading simple sentences from introducing sight words and CBC words. And moving on from reading skills to writing skills. So many a times, and I would go back to the slide to share a little bit more as to how we start with lowercase and then move to uppercase. But here in K2, children are writing both uppercase and lowercase letters from A to Z. They are able to write CBC words, they are writing sight words, they are writing simple sentences, and they are also able to punctuate their small passage and sentences with full stop, question mark, exclamation mark in sentences. Hindi is again something that we introduce in K2. So oral Hindi from the whole Varnmala, and blend to read a few words without matra. So there is no matra. And art, ud, tat, ink, ab, two-word phrases, but bus, chad, ghar, chal, no matra. And they are also writing akshar only. And of course, the foundation for Hindi language is also being built through introduction, through stories, through conversations. So these are some of the things that children are doing. So by the time from K2, the child is absolutely formal school ready to meet the demands and the curriculum demands of grade 1. And the child is ready socially, emotionally, physically, and intellectually to cope up with the curriculum of grade 1 successfully. So like I shared, so I am going backwards from K2. So it was very important for all of us to understand the level of children transitioning, the level at what our children are when they transition to formal schools. So for a child to be able to do all this that I have talked about in K2, let us understand what is happening at the K1 level. So at the K1, and this is just before K2. So K1 level, children are actually introduced to the letter sounds. This is here that the letter sounds are introduced, and they are reading very simple, consonant vowel sounds, and they are, frequently sight words are introduced. They are building vocabulary. Of course, it is much, much lesser form of it, but from learning their uppercase and lowercase letters to beginning to recognize individual sounds in words, these skills, they are actually building the foundation for reading and academic abilities that they will need to have later in life. So again, listening and talking contributes to their ability to read and write, and vice versa. So this is again something that, phonological awareness, where is very, very significantly reinforced in children, where, the ability to identify, to make oral rhymes, the ability to identify and work with syllables in spoken words, and the ability to hear, identify, and manipulate the individual signs. This is an important indicator of a child's readiness again to move to formal school. So much emphasis on vocabulary development through listening is actually an important, and that is why listening is so important. And for children to listen, it is important to communicate. It is an important predictor of success in reading comprehension. So both of these, phonological awareness as well as vocabulary development, they begin very, very early at play as infancy, like participation in rhyming. An infant may not be able to participate actively, but you will see an infant really gurgling, raising their hand and feet, and throwing their hands and feet when they listen to the their favorite rhymes. So how do rhymes become favorite? By over and over, exposing them to listening these rhymes. And through games, again in pre-K and K1, there are a lot of games and chants. There are shared books experiences. There is extended conversation that happens throughout their schooling and their daycare routine. So every activity, every routine is thoroughly conversed with in context and giving child enough opportunities to really build on to them. And when we introduce children to letters, so they start writing small sentences in 4-line books, like my name is so and so, and of course with support. So that is another thing that happens in K1. One step before that. So if K1 children are doing this, what are they doing in pre-K? Again, the focus remains on the 4 areas, which is the listening skill, the speaking, the pre-reading, and the pre-writing skill. So pre-K, we introduce lowercase letters first. Any idea why? Why do we introduce lowercase letters first? Because if we look at printed text anywhere, only the first letter of the sentence is in proper noun and is in uppercase letter. But the rest of the sentence will be in lowercase letters. So hence children will recognize more letters in the sentence if they can recognize lowercase first, as against only the first letter if only the uppercase were to be introduced. And that is why the logic of introducing children to lowercase is there. And all the letter sounds are introduced except for Q and U. Any idea why? Because these letters are very less frequently used. That is why Q and U are not. So this is something that, and all the letter sounds. So building vocabulary over here, children are they are more confident. Their executive functions are defined and developed. They are able to perform with great poise the self-help skills. So that is why in pre-K, the introduction and the focus on language and literacy building becomes a little more detailed and complex. Toddlers. So from infant to toddlers. So toddlers is from 1 to 3 year, and at KLAY we have junior toddler and senior toddler. And it is here in toddlers that listening and speaking is very, very important. So toddlers is all about listening and speaking. So the more we communicate with them, the more they will listen, the more they will understand, and they will. So they. So what is happening at the toddler brain, at the brain level? So toddlers advance from single words and phrases to conversing in short sentences. So verbally interacting and reading every day with toddlers is very important. So we may wonder that toddlers do not understand the text, the print. So why do we need to read to the toddler? But it has been proven, and we have research data to back it up, that reading every day with your toddler has a lasting impact on language, social, and cognitive development. Toddlers even begin to understand certain kind of intonations that are used while reading books, and this helps their engagement in the story. So it is very, very important to read to your toddler. And the retention of the content. So basically, they are engaged with all their senses, and it is helping in their retention. So when children are read to frequently, we often find that they recite key phrases or words from their favorite. And if we are young mothers, we know all this. At KLAY, we see it every day. A toddler, whenever it is story time, a toddler or a pre-K, that matter, even a K1 or a K2 child will get up and get their favorite story. So, and they even recite key phrases, and what does all of this do? This in turn builds confidence and interest in reading. And term 2 onwards, this is the first term. And then they are made familiar with the 13 letter sounds. So what are these 13 letter sounds that we talk about? So if you look at the listening skill box, it talks about SATIPN and not in alphabetical order. So any reason why? Again, the logic is very simple, that this enables children to begin building words as early as possible. Because if I were to ask you a question, how many words do you think three-letter words can be formed using the first 6 letters of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, F? It would be very few, right? It would be maybe a cab or a bed or a bag. But try making words with the first group of phonics letter order, SATIPN, and many words can be formed. Like AT and its family, SAT, PAT, it and its family, like sit, pit, knit, and its family like pan, tan, etc. And the list is endless. So there are many more opportunities that children get to build onto these letters, and that is why. And at the toddler age, then we expose children to books. Of course, infancy also we expose, but it is here that they learn to handle the books, looking at pictures, identifying favorite book pages, building vocabulary, express self-using phrases like I go, me eat, mama, water, etc. They are able to, tell their own names and recognize their friend's name. Their pincer grip is not developed, but their palmer grip is getting developed with scribbling with fingers in sand in different mediums, scribbling using crayons, and of course the scribbling is all outside the given boundary. There are no boundaries. Scribbling patterns, and they're just figuring out how to use their finger dexterity and how to what kind of impact it is having on paper. So these are some of the things that children are doing. So this is how we progressively start building on to their language and literacy. And every batch at KLAY, whether it is toddlers, whether it is junior toddler, senior toddler, pre-K, while the themes may be near to far, the themes progressively get more and more complex, building on to their cognitive abilities and contributing to their executive functions, to their intellectual abilities by making it more complex, by helping them draw from the prior knowledge and showing them the big picture so that they are able to correlate and they are able to build onto their knowledge. The prodding, the gentle prodding that we do progressively from one age group to another is to enable children by asking open-ended questions rather than by providing questions. So toddlers, junior toddler, senior toddler is all about blended learning. And when we move progressively upwards, K1, K2, it's all about experiential learning, inquiry-based learning. So while at the toddler level, it is largely led by the facilitator. At the senior level, the K1, K2, the facilitator is gently guiding by providing experiences in the right kind of environment, by providing children with tools that so that they are able to manipulate, so they are able to build onto their curiosity, so that they are able to ask questions and they are able to explore freely in a safe and stimulating environment. So every nook and corner at KLAY is supported by a learning environment, which will again holistically support the child's development. So these are some of the things that we do, and of course, our routine is our routine at KLAY and our curriculum at KLAY, like the electrical wiring analogy that I shared with you, is so intertwined in such a way that it is a healthy mix of structured and unstructured activities. So children have active time to move from active to passive stages. And while both of them contribute to their development, the teacher or the facilitator is gently guiding them and nurturing them to really move from one level, from one progression to another. So the next slide talks about, so what do we do? How can we support the language and literacy in early years? And this is very, very important. What all can we do with children by supporting them? And this is a question that all of us need to ask ourselves. So again, I would go back to the brain of a child and the context that we have. So here are the 10 commandments that all of us should try and work so that from the brain perspective, we can help our children make strong connections. So the first one is ensure healthy safety and good nutrition. So develop a warm and caring relationship with children. Respect is very important. To be 100% in the moment with your child, whichever activity you are doing or whatever chore you are sharing with the child, to be 100%. And that helps them feel safe and secure. The serve and return works very well. So like a tennis match, how you respond to a child's cues, it makes a world of difference in their learning. So we have to be cued into the child's rhythm and moods, even in the first days and weeks of life. So like an infant will cry, we know that it is a cry for maybe food, maybe milk, maybe the child is soiled the diaper, or maybe the child needs a nap. But as parents, we are totally wired. So let us try and understand what children are feeling, because emotions are very, very important. And emotional stability is something that when we talk to children on a daily basis about their emotions, that really helps them to emotionally stabilize. Of course, We've all heard that every child is unique. Keep in mind that from birth, children have different temperaments and that they grow at their own pace, and the pace varies from child to child. So again, giving you the analogy of a seed. So our role as parent and caregivers is to provide the right kind of nurturing, the environment, the sunlight, and the manure. Which seed will blossom into which flower is something none of us know. But we know that they will bloom when the time is right and when the environment is right. Talk, read, and sing to children. The most critical and important thing. Please talk as much as you can. Talk about daily things, talk about everything that you're introducing. Encourage safe exploration and play. Give children opportunities to move around. We know that we are living in a world where there are many limitations, but however, within that framework, let us find opportunities for children, to really explore not just their environment, but relationships as well. Discipline is something that, uh, while the word may sound very harsh, but discipline is something, talk to children what they seem to be feeling and help them express their feelings in a better way. If the feeling expressed is probably inappropriate, that as parents we may feel, then do talk to them the whys behind it rather than the no, and tell them what to do, because children do not know. They, like all of us, we want to expect. We know what to expect, and children are no different. So we need to share with them that what is an appropriate behavior that we are looking at. Establish routines. Routine goes a long way. Again, it is part of the expectation setting, and it starts with timely bedtime routine, getting up on time, a good healthy breakfast, so that when a child comes to school, the child is ready for those critical, optimal hours of learning in the morning, and the child is very receptive and the child is looking forward to it. If a child has not had a good sleep at night and the child is cranky in the morning, and if the child is hungry, the first few critical hours of learning will be lost to them and as well as us. Become involved in the childcare and preschool. So be in touch with us. Do share with us your concerns, and we keep sharing through different forums and different mediums everything that your child is important doing. And limit television. So television over here is a broad term, basically limit gadgets. So, and let us all remember that, we are all born with innate drive towards development. Babies, our kids are no different. They reach out for interaction through their first babbling gestures and then their cries. And that is why the interaction between the child and the environment really shapes brain development. And that is why interaction between the child and the adult. So building on to positive relationships is very, very critical. And that is what fosters, positive development and proper brain connections are formed. So this is something that all of us really need to remember. So so this is what I wanted to talk about. So thank you so much for patiently hearing to me, and would love to have questions from you if there are any. So you can also send me your questions at seema.varma@clayschools.com. I'll be happy to answer if there are any questions that you have. Uh, yes, so this was the last slide. So what are the magical moments for joyful bonding? So for all of us, these are some of the things. This was the last slide. So there are many opportunities for us to interact with our children while we talk about speaking to our children. So, like I shared earlier, every routine or every chore that gives us an opportunity to interact with our children is creating that magical moment for joyful bonding. So some of the examples over here are shopping at the grocery store, changing diaper, enjoying music, riding on a bus, making a meal together, going for walk, playing games, doing activity, nap time, story time. So these are a few, but I'm sure that you have many more opportunities and moments with your child that will give you an opportunity to really talk about these moments and to really build a very happy and healthy relationship with your child. Because let's all remember, because the interactions that we have in early years are really going to help child build the foundation for what family means 20 years later. So let us all try and create that kind of that sense of belonging and that sense of nurturing environment for our children so that they can thrive and they can fully seize their potential. So, so thank you so much so for your time. And with that, I would just like to end my presentation. So, thank you.